Alright everyone, gun control doesn't work. That's been pretty much time tested. People will occasionally knock one another off, harm one another and do terrible things, and it really doesn't matter. Like Timmy McVeigh managed to liquidate a whole bunch of people using nothing more than basic chemistry knowledge and a U-Haul. He didn't need any guns in order to do that. Now, of course, that was a reaction to the government actions at Waco. Waco, in turn, involved supposedly automatic weapons, although we now know that's dubious at best, and probably Janet Reno just wanted to butcher a bunch of people as a precursor to tyranny. That being said, Justin Trudeau somehow has managed to formulate a system by which the Canadian government that is technically has a legislative system. That is, the legislature, for the most part, acts. It's sort of similar to the United States methodology, although Trudeau is technically Her Majesty's Prime Minister of Canada in a loose, sort of roundabout, semi-sovereign way. Somehow he has the unilateral authority to ignore the legislature there that balked at the idea of banning Muskeria assault-style weapons, and we'll get into the very subtle linguistic difference between the terminology used now and the terminology used in the past, and exactly why. I mentioned this when I was talking to Ramsey Paul, actually, on the last Happy Homelands. No, it's meaningful. It's by the way, linguistic warfare. It's linguistic propaganda. I'll get into it. Somehow, before he wanted more gun restrictions in Canada, and the legislature wouldn't let it happen, and so now, because they had a mass shooting, somehow he has the unilateral authority to ban different kinds of weapons on his own. I'm not sure exactly how he has that. Of course, you got to understand, his party lost the last election, but because of the odd electoral structure within the nation of Canada, ended up with more seats anyway. So somehow he managed to stay on as prime minister with this large number of seats within his party, despite the fact that he didn't even win. Actually, his party got crushed. It was funny. Wasn't it a double-digit gap too? Like the Conservatives beat their ass actually, and some nationalist party as well did quite well, and but they don't have a majority or something. It's a weird electoral system. People were complaining at the time. By the way, it's sort of the inverse of the last election in the United States, where Hillary Clinton did technically, she won the popular vote by, I think, several million because of California and New York turnout, but still loses because of the electoral structure in the U.S. The left hated it then, but with Trudeau, they were praising him, saying, "Oh God, thank goodness the Conservatives didn't win." They probably, by the way, would have cucked out and acted the same way. I have no doubt that they'd be doing the same thing, because the big government types, including the so-called Conservatives in Canada, which would be Democrats by U.S. standards, by the way, they want gun control. Of course they want to disarm people, or at the very least tax their weapons, of course. It's funny how some people make that their priority. We're going to stop gun crime by taxing the weapons. You have to get a tax stamp for everything now. Your mid-19th century black powder revolver or whatever. By the way, I think you can still mail order black powder revolvers, which is very, very surreal. Anyway, somehow he managed to do this, but the thing that I took away from it was, if you look at media coverage, and indeed Trudeau's own statements, and the statements from his party, you notice how a couple years ago, whenever, like in the wake of any shooting or something, when the Democrats here, the Liberals there, or wherever, would talk about gun control, talk about scary assault weapons, they'd say, well, assault rifles should be banned. There was an article at the time, and I remember talking about this, I think about a year and a half ago. I can't remember exactly the subject that I was talking about at the time. It's something related to gun control, but I can't remember what exactly spurred the video. I remember remarking on this, that there was an article by a pro-gun group, and it was pointing, an anti-gun sort of group. And they were pointing out that the reason why the left fundamentally lost the debate, generally speaking, on guns is because people on the left don't understand guns. They were using the wrong terminology. They'd say things like Biden talking about a magazine that holds 100 clips, or Kerry talking about a rifle that shoots 1,000 rounds a second, and weird shit like that. That's simply not true. That any person with an elementary understanding of even basic engineering, let alone guns themselves in the historical sense, would know was not true. They're talking about weapons that are designed for civilians somehow being military grade, ammunition types that no military uses being military grade, and just stupid things like that. And that this was why the left lost. Because anytime they started talking about gun control, the average leftist, without a knowledge of guns, sounded dumb. And so here's the thing. One of the biggest counter arguments to, the modern push for confiscation has been the liberals constantly talk about assault weapons. Well, the AR-15 is not an assault weapon. It's topically similar, it's aesthetically similar to a military-style weapon. The fact is that I can take something that resembles a Browning machine gun, but manually fires bolt-action style 22 rounds. It looks the same. It looks scary. It looks like something a military would use, but no military would be crazy enough to deploy it. They're not deployed on the AR-15. The civilian version is not deployed on any battlefield in the world. This is the same for all of these semi-automatic sporting rifles, which is what they properly are. They are for hunting, literally speaking, in the general sense. Sporting rifles and comparable pistol variants. They're civilian. No military would use them. In a pinch, I suppose, if a soldier wounded on the battlefield stumbles on an AR-15, they're out of all the other ammo, but they find this cache, this AR-15 or an AR pistol and a bunch of ammo. They'd prefer that to using a billy club. They'd prefer that to a baseball bat, but it's not military grade. It just isn't. That's false. So now they've started using a new term, and you've started seeing it deployed, and this was organized. I guarantee this is not organic. This is being astroturfed. That's why the term is being replicated. Anytime you see a new novel linguistic term replicated among groups of politicians and legacy media heads in a short period of time, it's astroturfed. It was centrally organized. The term was either chosen by a third party in order to be memorable, in order to be reported on widely so that it would take hold, or those groups got together themselves, Trudeau and the CBC or whatever. Probably the latter in this case. Now they call them assault-style weapons. That sounds different because they're not claiming it's an assault weapon because they're clearly wrong. They're just saying that it looks like a military weapon. See, the problem is making the weapon shiny and black and putting a flash suppressor on it and a pistol grip doesn't fundamentally alter the real purpose of the weapon, which is to fire a bullet. The purpose of that gun is to fire bullets. Not all of the other things that are aesthetic or they're designed for the user, like for instance suppressors. Suppressors are best used to keep from going deaf while doing frequent training with your weapon. Nobody wants to go deaf. Hearing protection that you wear on the head only goes so far. You want to spend $2,000 for a fully modern a Kevlar helmet that has noise-canceling ear covers, you go right ahead, but you shouldn't have to do that in order to fire a gun and not go deaf. When Trudeau comes out and says, well, nobody needs an AR-15 to hunt. No, nobody needs a bolt-action rifle to hunt. They can hunt with a bow and arrow, but they shouldn't have to choose the point of the AR-15. It's highly customizable for the user experience, number one. This is why it's so fucking popular. Highly customizable and relatively reliable. And generally speaking, more or less affordable to people that are into that sort of weapon. It's reasonably safe and reliable. It fires an intermediate round. I mean, you're not talking about something that fires, it fires 8,000 millimeter rounds at 10 per second. No, it doesn't. It's a topical sporting rifle. But the thing is that a mass shooter decided to deploy such a weapon. But here's the thing. Here's the thing that here's the nuance that's being lost. In this particular case, this latest shooting in Canada, which I think 20 some odd people got killed. This dude had a replica cop car and a uniform and could walk up to people and gun them down, posing as a cop. And that's the real big problem. The real big problem is that people are so heavily trained to mindlessly obey anyone in a uniform that they were sitting ducks. It wouldn't have mattered if he had used a mid-19th century revolver. He still could have killed 20 people. And I believe killed the majority of them with a handgun anyway. By the way, the weapon he was using, that is the assault weapon anyway, so-called, wasn't even licensed. He wasn't allowed to own it. It was illegal. So how is banning these weapons going to help? It probably came, they're not even telling us where it came from, probably from the US. Well, then exactly. Trudeau's new unilateral ban that should be challenged by his legislature on a legal basis, I would assume, since it seems like he's somehow circumvented a proper role of the legislative body there, he should probably be warned that it wouldn't do anything. That this particular non-legislation, this executive action that he's taking, wouldn't have saved any of these lives. Of course, people like liberalism will gobble it up. What I would say to the people of Canada is now is your time. You've got this 2-year grace period involved. Maybe some of your guns will have a boating accident. They no longer exist. You dropped them in a lake. There's lots of them up in Canada, so it's not a big problem. I don't know where my gun went. I don't know where those 5,000 rounds of ammo went. I was out on a boat one day, and, you know, the boat, it was a tippy and the bad weather, and I didn't have enough ballast, and it fell overboard. Shit, yeah, by them, yeah, I reported it lost. Why don't you consider that possibility? Of course, if it has a boating accident, I believe by law you have to report it lost. Sorry, officers. You know what the people during the Revolution used to do? This is just an anecdote. I'm not encouraging anyone to skirt Canadian law. Not that it applies to me, because I'm not a fucking Canadian. Thank goodness. It's basically like the more tyrannical version of the U.S. with worse weather and more taxes, generally speaking. You know what the people in the Revolutionary War used to do in order to hide their weapons from the British government? Their own government that, by the way, was primarily fired upon in the first place for trying to confiscate weapons from an armory. Not because of taxes or tea, as you've been taught. No, it was because of weapons confiscation. That's what started the shooting. Up until then, it was just civil disobedience, and occasionally they would tar and feather a tax collector. They didn't open fire till the British started firing at them. Keep that in mind. You know what they did to hide their weapons, muskets, sabers, and so forth, from confiscation? The ball and powder, the various things that they needed to fight? They would plow up their fields, and then they would plow a deeper furrow, and then they would put the stuff in a burlap sack, and then they would put it in the dirt and cover it up. And when the British came by, all they saw was freshly planted corn, freshly planted sorghum. They didn't see any guns. No, we don't have any. No, we don't mill our own musket balls with something that we buried 2 feet deep in the dirt and we're going to pull out the second your troops leave. And they had people all over the countryside that would warn people ahead of time, hey, the British are coming, they'll be here in 6 hours, so, go and replow this section of field, and they kept their guns. And so the American Revolution was not completely starved for armaments and powder. It would have been if the British had been successful at their confiscation attempts, now wouldn't it? Now, of course, I'm not encouraging violent revolution or anything, but I am saying Trudeau should be out on his ass. You've got this grace period. Vote him out as quickly as possible. Hold a recall or whatever you people can do. I know you've got this weird fusion government where it's half monarchy, technically speaking. Justin Trudeau's acting like a little baby dictator, and he is a little baby. The only reason that he got elected is because he had a baby face. He got elected by a bunch of people who thought he looked good. He doesn't have any finesse. He's a goddamn embarrassment on the world stage. Nobody respects Trudeau. Half of his party probably doesn't respect him either. So yeah, Trudeau unilaterally banning sporting rifles because, they're the wrong color. They're black. I know Trudeau probably has a problem with that. And shiny, and sometimes they have a pistol grip. Oh my God, they can hold more than 10 bullets in the magazine. It's a big problem. You don't need that to hunt deer. Dude, there's worse things than deer up in Canada. Don't you have like fucking grizzly bears up there and shit? Polar bears up far enough north? Now, I don't think that I want to go up against a polar bear if it's attacking me with a .22 revolver. Unless I manage to hit it right in the eye, it's probably going to keep attacking me and it's just going to piss it off. Then it's going to eat me even more savagely. That's about all. Peace out.